All right, guys. Well, we have a special guest. Karandeep is back with one of my mentors. I'm so happy to have him here. And we are talking regulatory affairs, quality assurance. If you're thinking about a career in these two streams, in this field, in the science field, we're answering your questions. Everything from career journey, professional development, education, salary. You'll see all the topics in the timestamps below in the description. Definitely check that out. So Karandeep, thanks for joining. I'm really happy to have you here. Perhaps you could just introduce or tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, Brian. So in terms of who I am, my name is Karandeep, and I'm a quality and regulatory consultant specializing within medical devices and more recently, digital health AI.
And how long have you been in the industry for?
I would say about 6 years now.
Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
It's been very interesting. So my background was in pharmaceuticals. It's both what I did my sort of bachelor's and master's degree within. And how I got into medical devices was the first role that I got out of university was a medical devices manufacturer. So that was my first taste of what sort of medical devices were. I heard about them while studying about pharmaceuticals, but it wasn't something I knew a lot about. And it was there I kind of picked up the bug for medical devices. The reason I went into medical devices is kind of pharmaceuticals often attack the symptoms, i.e., if you have a heart-related issue, they will give you a drug that will sort of attack the symptoms. What I like with medical devices is that you are going directly for the root cause of the problem. So just from my point of view, I thought that this is an industry that I want to get into, and I haven't turned back since.
So some people have asked and asked about, whether they want to go to pharmaceutical stream versus medical devices. Give some insight to the viewers, especially for those that are kind of humming and hawing which field to go down.
So yeah, it was just a case of my first role was in medical devices. So you could say perhaps even happened by accident. Had I gone into pharmaceuticals, I would have stuck with that route. But what's quite interesting now is the increase of combination devices. For example, you can have like drug device combination. So for products like that, they need both a pharma person and a medical device person. So if there's somebody out there who has maybe a medical device background or a pharmaceutical background and is looking to switch, a combination product is something that's a bit of a sweet spot between both. And that could be sort of a stepping stone for you to decide to switch from one industry to another.
What's an example of a combination product for the viewers?
An example could be like, let's just say there's a regular wound dressing that has a drug attached to it. So it might be a wound dressing that you apply over the wound, but then it has a drug on there for accelerated wound healing.
You're a consultant now. How did you get there? Or were you working at other companies? How many companies did you have to go through? Or what was that journey looking like for you?
Okay, so the journey was a kind of work my way up. So, I started off as a regulatory affairs associate within one company, slowly worked my way into a specialist role, then a senior specialist, a managerial, kind of got to the point where I was at the high managerial point. And it was at that point that I got interested in sort of contracting and consulting, but I wasn't quite ready to make that jump. So at the time I was working quite a flexible job and I decided to do a bit of sort of contracting in the background, maybe 1 or 2 days a week that I could fit around my career. Once I got confident that, there's plenty of contract work there and I can set up as a consultant, I then went and made that jump. So it wasn't just a case of I went straight into consultancy. I basically grew my career as much as I could. And I had a mixture between working with small startups because you learn different things within those companies and also working with big companies. When you work with big companies, you're going to get a lot of training on the job. You're going to learn a lot. With startups, you had the advantage that you can move up the ladder a lot quicker because with the startup culture, they're very fast paced. And, they don't necessarily care how many years experience that you have in a startup. It's more of a case of if you're capable of doing the job, we're going to give it to you. With a large company, they're a bit different. They often base things on years of experience. But what I recommend to people is get a taste of small startup companies, get a taste of big companies, because it's much better that way. If you only work for startups, you're only going to learn so much. If you only work for huge companies, then perhaps you're not going to grow as fast. What you need in your career is a blend of both. And it's at that point you decide that you want to get into consulting once you've had that experience.
If you're new in your career, do you want to go big company first or startup? Do you have a preference?
My recommendation is if it's going to be your first career, go for a big company. Reason being is you're going to get a lot of support. You're going to get a lot of people there where regardless of how little experience you have, are going to be there to support you. With a startup company, they don't necessarily have the resources for that and you have to move quite fast. So my recommendation is start off with a big company. If you're confident in yourself and you feel as though you can take this career on, then switch to a startup. If you go straight for a startup, you have to be very fast paced and that doesn't suit everybody.
I agree with that approach. And I would add that in a startup, because you're moving so quickly, you can make mistakes that they wouldn't even know, or like if you're not properly trained in the QA or RA field, you're just going based on whatever guidance documents or what you hear from your network. So you may not be doing everything the best practice, right, in the best way. Whereas I think in a larger company, they've already fleshed that out. They've got a lot more procedures in place. You've got the mentorship and the training involved.
I agree with that, because with the startup, like you said, you can start making mistakes and that mistake can trickle onwards. Like you said, a startup company may not have that knowledge you've made that mistake. Within a bigger company, you're going to have a manager and a senior manager looking over that, and they can spot the mistakes early on. The last thing you want is to make a lot of mistakes and then that product goes on the market and it starts harming people.
Exactly. It's like, especially in the QA RA role, there's a lot more on your shoulders, I would say. Give us a little bit of insight as to what you like, what you enjoy doing in your field, in your industry.
What I enjoy doing is mentoring people. So as you may have seen, I do a lot of videos online and I like helping people and sort of breaking down, and that's it, basically teaching people what medical devices is all about. And medical devices are all around us. People don't even realize things like hospital beds, even hospital chairs are classed as medical devices. Some of the software on your mobile phone that gives you health advice is a medical device. When people think of medical devices, they start thinking the traditional stuff, things like pacemakers and defibrillators. But it's something that's part of our everyday life, just like consumer electronics or any goods like that. So that's what I enjoy about it as well. And number two is I actually enjoy that the work that I do is actually helping people, because I sit here buried in paperwork, getting things into FDA approval, whether it's EU approval. But when I see the actual device that I worked on out on the market actually helping people, that's kind of what makes it worthwhile.
What is a typical day like for you?
Typical day can quite vary, especially when you have international clients. Some days being here based in the UK, some days it might be up at 4 a.m. Some days I have calls at 4 p.m. But a typical day when it's a bit more sort of quiet is usually get up in the morning, I check through emails, and I maybe spend like half an hour just sort of going through, prioritizing different works, working with multiple clients, seeing what deadlines need to be met, going from a project management software, and then just organizing my work throughout the day. But in many cases, that doesn't work. You'll have a client who just wants to fire a call with you at the last minute. So yeah, the day is very, very varied. And that's kind of what I like about it. When I was working in full-time employment, the day would be very sort of fixed and I would know what's going on. When you move to consulting, I suppose what you could say is very challenging because you never know what's around the corner. But I suppose that's what makes it exciting.
If I was a viewer and I'm like, I have no idea what medical device RA looks like, or what were the typical tasks, or what are the typical projects I would expect, what would be expected of me to do?
Okay, so a typical thing that you'll be doing, a big part of is the creation of technical files, things like your risk assessments, biocompatibility testing, test that the device is safe, bench testing, clinical testing. So what you do is prior to submission, you have to create something called technical files, which I believe in pharmaceuticals is known as CTDs, clinical trial dossiers, something along those lines. And what it is just a collection of documents that you then submit, whether that's to a notified body to get your product out onto the EU, or if you want to submit it to the USA, you would do that with the FDA, which is the government, basically. Other things, you'll be getting involved in post-market surveillance. So this is a case of where your product is out on the market and you're looking for things like recalls, complaints, any corrective actions that might be taken, any sort of, field safety actions that might be there as well. Also dealing with competent authorities. So here in the UK, that's the MHRA. In the USA, that's the FDA. And that's basically dealing with any complaints that might be coming in. Also customer complaints, things with dealing with product returns. At one point I was working with pacemakers, defibrillators, and we're having them delivered back to the labs. And we're physically inspecting, like, how did this failure actually happen? So that was what a typical day looked like for me. So regulatory is one of those interesting roles, at least in medical devices. You basically have a top line view of the company. You kind of have to keep an eye on each and every bit. So you're talking to sales, you're talking to marketing, because marketing, they want to make ridiculous claims about your product, which in some cases may not be legal. Sales are, they want to make as many sales as possible, but then you're involved in a recall. Then you have the quality department as well, who's, constantly looking into basically any investigations that might be going on. So it's a case of where you talk to nearly every department that there is when you're in regulatory.
What are some things that you would feel that could be done better in the industry, or what you don't enjoy in that particular sector or role?
What I don't enjoy is people who want to get into the industry immediately after finishing college or university. Reason being, a lot of it is experience-based. So often if you want to get into regulatory or quality, you would have maybe had to work in the medical devices lab, or you maybe would have had to be an assistant, or maybe in sales and marketing just to get a bit of a taste. But I know there's people out there that would just like me. You just want to go straight into that field. And that's what I find is lacking. There needs to be internships out there. There needs to be starter positions out there, because I feel as though it's a waste of time if you have to go out and do a role that you don't enjoy for 2 to 3 years just to get into the role that you want to. It makes more sense to get people in there. And number two is there's a shortage of quality and regulatory staff. So there has to be a change. And the reason there's a shortage, again, is because of the entry barrier.
You're saying that companies won't hire people straight out of university, and that's the challenge? Is that what you're
effectively implying? Yeah, it's very rare that they do that.
So how are they getting fresh blood into the company then, if that's the case?
So this is quite interesting. A lot of the people I speak to, at least in the medical devices field, are people who maybe worked as quality engineers for 10 years and then got into it. People who worked as software engineers for 5 years and got into it. It's kind of one of those things you fall into rather than get into off the bat.
Any advice for those that are coming out of university? I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot. So given that, any tips for the fresh grads out there?
Go out and try to get summer internships, or maybe if you're in between your second and third years, maybe try to go out and get like a year internship in between your studies. Having that work experience will help you land those entry-level roles. Also, don't be afraid to just approach companies. Just because a company isn't offering a summer internship or, a year internship, just send them an email and say, hey guys, I'm looking for some work experience. Because the worst that company is going to do is ignore you. So worse off. And the best thing a company can do is say yes. And then that can change your career forever.
What separates like the good candidates from the great ones?
What separates the good candidates from the great ones? That's an interesting question. I mean, the great candidates are the ones that are constantly learning. The good candidates are the ones that are able to do the job in the moment. The great candidate is the one who's looking a few years in the future, for example. So a great candidate right now will be looking into software medical devices. They'll be looking into digital health. They'll be looking into AI, because that's going to be the future. The good candidate is the one who's just sort of turning up to do work, doing a very good job, and then going home, and then not constantly studying. With regulatory, it's a constant learning curve. There's always obstacles coming out. The industry is changing so fast. There's so much money and innovation going on. A great person is one who's out there, is actively looking online and seeing what the changes are in the industry and just keeping on top of those regulations.
One of the common questions that I get, Brian, do I need to study the regulations like with no experience? What's your opinion on that? Do you think that they should spend time and know the regulation inside out, or where do you think their focus should be?
This is the beauty of the regulations. They're completely free and they're available online, and they're available in many different languages. Even if English is not the language you speak, I'm pretty sure there's a copy in your native language or a language that you can speak. And it's for that reason I recommend go out and read them. Go out and understand them, because when you go for interview, if you're one of the lucky ones that's there for an entry-level position, you would seriously impress the interviewers if you read the regulation and you can quote from it and you can talk about the challenges it presents. So my recommendation is go out there and read it. There's no excuse. It's freely available online. If you have an internet connection, you have access to it.
Add that, make sure, that you actually understand the regulations before you quote it. I've had candidates, they'll quote it, but completely out of context, or they're just saying the words just to get the brownie points, but then it doesn't make sense in application. How about salary? Let's talk about salary. And of course, we don't know specific numbers, but can you give a rough range for what an entry-level position may look like in the medical device sector?
So I'm speaking on behalf of the UK here. I'm aware in the rest of the world, the salaries might change, but I would say an entry-level position could be anywhere from around 20,000 all the way up to 30,000 pounds per year. And it really is location based. If you're based in somewhere like London, where living costs are quite high, it can possibly be even higher. If you're based in a more remote part of England, or maybe where living costs are a lot low, it's going to be towards the lower end of it.
My standpoint, I would say also the type of organization, like the size, right? The global organizations will actually have deeper pockets versus like a smaller or medium-sized business. I don't know if that's the same in your case, but I just wanted to add that in there. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. But then as an entry-level position, what I say to people is don't chase the salary as long as it's enough for you to survive on, because go and chase the experience. That's really what's going to get you forward. So, for the first maybe 1 to 3 years, don't chase the salary, get the experience. Then when you have the experience, the salary will come itself.
If I am going for a quality assurance role or regulatory affairs, should I get my regulatory affairs certification, for example? Do I need a master's degree? So what is your take in terms of how much education is the right amount or too much?
Education is good, but this is the mistakes I've seen some people making. They go out and getting master's degrees in regulatory affairs. They're doing online courses in regulatory affairs, yet they've never worked a day in the industry. And what I say to people is, if you've got 4 to 5 certifications, you've got a master's degree in regulatory affairs, you're not getting hired. I said, that's the issue. Go out and work and see why you're not getting hired, because there's people out there with less qualifications who are. So in terms of what you need, I say a recommendation is at minimum a bachelor's degree within a scientific discipline. It doesn't necessarily have to be within regulatory affairs, as long as it's within a scientific discipline. But on the other end of the scale, I've seen people get into regulatory affairs without any form of higher education. But I say that's more of a rarity than a given.
I've seen candidates where they've got the master's, right? The bachelor's, the master's, the certifications, multiple certifications. They're trying to keep busy with education, right? Like after a while, they just can't get a job. And so they try to keep busy. And I think that is too much. And you can definitely see that come across, and it shows off in the wrong way when it comes to the resume. It's important just to get enough information or education. And then on top of it, know that if you find the right company, that you can hopefully get them to pay for the additional education you need to step up to that next career move or whatever it is that they're looking for. Keeping it very, very simple, resume A, resume B, or candidate A, candidate B for an entry level position today. To you, what do you think it impresses you from a resume standpoint? And then we can talk more about like in an interview or in-person meeting.
What would impress me the most is the kind of questions they ask. If you're going to come as an entry-level person into the industry, and like we touched on earlier, there's going to be regulations and standards that you don't quite understand just from reading it. And if you ask those questions in an interview, I would be impressed, because it shows that you're actually putting effort in. And number 2, which is important in regulatory, is nobody is perfect. Even with me, sometimes there's going to be times where I maybe don't understand something and I have to reach out to somebody else. And it's just knowing when to get help. And I think that's the most important thing there. In terms of sitting in an interview and having resume A and resume B, for me personally, is what is this person's extracurricular activity like? Now, not everybody necessarily agree with that, but extracurricular activity can show me how much discipline you have. Because within quality and regulatory affairs, one of the biggest skills that you need is discipline, the ability to work autonomously. And if I can see that through your extracurricular activities, that will make you stand out a lot more.
What about people that don't have extracurricular activities then? What happens to those guys?
It's like I said, it's to do with the questions that they ask. Have they read copies of the regulation? Or even another trick, and feel free to go and use this in an interview, make some notes on the regulations after you read them and take that into an interview. If you come to an interview and you show me saying, look, Karandeep, I've made 5 pieces of notes here on this regulation. This is what I think about it. I can guarantee you 99% of other candidates would not have done that.
So how about they get the job? What would impress you immensely, that first week, that first month? What do you think is a good hire versus a decent hire, a mediocre, like the great ones? What do you think that distinction looks like?
The great hire would not rush into things. And the first question they would ask me is, Karandeep, what are your goals and what are you trying to achieve? That would impress me a lot, because a lot of the work that I'm going to delegate to them is going to also feed into me. So it's important they understand what my goals and what my deadlines are. And number 2 is they always feel free to ask for help. I'm always ready to help people. They know what the weaknesses are. And number 3 is they tell me what their goals and ambitions are. Do they want to get to managerial level, or do they want to stay where they are? Is there any particular type of regulatory affairs that they want to get into? If they tell me that within the first week, it makes my life a lot easier and makes their life a lot better too, because I can help them achieve that. Whereas a good candidate would just kind of get on with the task that I tell them to do and kind of wouldn't question it. I always say to people is always question the work that you're getting, because that is the way you're going to learn. Be very open with your managers, tell them what you're looking for, and they can help guide you towards that.
Can you give an example of scenario where they're asking you, what are your goals? What do you want me to fulfill?
So an example could be that I want to get this medical device I want to get all the paperwork ready for submission in 6 months' time. That could be my goal, because we want to get this product on the market, let's say 9 to 10 months from now. If we submit it in 6 months, we stand a chance of doing it. So the idea being is that when that candidate is doing their work, they can then recognize what is actually in line with me reaching that 6 months target versus the tasks which may be important, i.e. a complaint or a recall, but aren't going to help me achieve that goal and target. So in that way, I don't have to look over them. They're just going to say, okay, something has landed on my desk. this is related to the submission. So this is what I need to get done first prior to the next task.
For the average Joe, what would they expect in terms of how they progress in their career in regulatory affairs or quality assurance?
So yeah, you usually start off at what is known as junior or associate level, which will be the case that you'll be supporting a manager. You'll just be doing simple tasks such as compiling documents, maybe proofreading certain things. Once you get to that next stage and you get to maybe senior associate or a specialist role, at that point, you will actually start doing things such as writing pieces of documents together, maybe compiling information, maybe having interdepartmental sort of things. From there on, you may go into a senior specialist role, or you may go into a managerial role. Like I said, job titles can be a bit loose in terms of what you do. At that point, you will start managing the team, maybe one or two people who sort of will be doing the work for you and getting things sorted for you. But at that point, at managerial level is when you start getting involved with things like submissions, talking directly to notified bodies, talking directly to competent authorities like the FDA or the UK MHRA. And then from there onwards, we're talking sort of vice president and president roles where you won't necessarily be doing the work, but you'll be looking at it from an oversight point of view. You'll be in a position where you're very experienced and maybe somebody would hand you a submission. You can flick through the pages and maybe spot the mistakes within about half an hour to an hour. So at that point, you've proven yourself and, you can basically take a little bit of a seat back and just have a stronger oversight of what's going on in the company.
Yeah. Seat back, more meetings, all of that, better lunches. Yeah. You talked about the entry level, then the specialist and so on. How many years in between are we looking at on average?
So I can say anywhere from around 1 to 3 years between each position, anywhere towards the top end, talking from like a manager to vice president and president. I wouldn't be surprised if that can take up to 10 years in some cases.
What are some of the skill sets you would expect that progress to look like? So someone that wants to get into VP 15 years from now, what do you think are some of the skill sets that they're going to need to build or learn or develop over that time?
Number one is networking. Get your name known in the company. If the VP doesn't know about you, he can't help you come up. So get your name out there. Number two would be strong discipline. Like I was saying, a lot of the work with regulatory, especially, it's even if you're in like the lower positions like junior or associate, there's a lot of autonomy involved where it'd be more project-based rather than finish this task within 2 hours, finish that within 2 hours, and more like you'll have a project and you have a month to finish it. So you have to be reliant on yourself. Number three is the willingness to learn. I'm going to be honest, if you work in quality and regulatory affairs, you will need to spend some of your private time studying the regulations, the standards, watching the news and changes in the world. And number four will be always be willing to ask for help. It's much better that you walk up to your manager and say, look, I don't understand this, or I'm not comfortable doing this, rather than you trying to hide it, making a mistake, and then managers find out about it 2 to 3 weeks from then on, because that's going to cause a lot of delays.
You want the VP to know who you are. Any tactics on making that happen? If I'm a fresh grad, a rookie, how do they going to know who Brian is?
If you're fortunate enough is that they're there based in the company, go and join them for a coffee, go and join them for their lunch. As you're walking through the corridor, say hi, introduce yourself, tell them that you're there, because that you're still going to be an integral part of that process. That VP is going to see that, whatever work you're doing is ultimately going to feed up to the VP. So it's important that they know who you are. If they don't be afraid to send an email out. Every company that I've gone to, I found out who the whole of the regulatory team is. And I've always emailed them and introduced myself to them the first time.
Introduce yourself, set up those meetings, set up a one-on-one. I think they'd like to see that. They'd like to see, hey, this person feels different. This person's ambitious. They're not stepping on any toes, but they want to get to know me and know how they can help me, right? Like that type of discussion is, I think a lot of people are definitely welcome to. Back to you. What is it like working as a consultant?
It has its ups and it has its downs. And this is the mistake that a lot of people make, is they think they always look at the good side of consultancy, but they never look at the bad side of consultancy. So 100%, I have a lot more flexibility than I ever would in a full-time job. Of course, the salary is much higher. Number three, you've got the tax benefits, because at least with most consultants, it's almost run like a business rather than, you getting taxed first, we get taxed last. However, you end up working a lot more hours than you ever would have in a full-time job. And that is the nature of consulting. Number two is your hours are all over the place. If you think that you can just work 9 to 5 as a consultant, that's not going to happen. Some days you got to be up early, some days you got to be up late. A client may even call you saying, hey guys, I've got an unannounced audit happening right now. Can you please come down and help me out straight away? And you have to be willing to do those things with your clients. Basically your clients kind of come first. So that is the kind of bad side of it. But the good side is, what I like is I can pick and choose my projects. When you work in a full-time job, you kind of have to do what your manager tells you to do, whether you like that task or not. As a consultant, I can pick and choose the particular clients that I want. I can pick and choose the type of projects that I want. And to some extent, I know I was saying that hours all over the place. I can kind of pick and choose which hours I want to work. So, there's been some days where during the week, maybe on a Wednesday morning where I don't have any meetings, I've decided to take the day off and spend it with the family. Had I been a full-time job, I wouldn't be fortunate enough to do that.
So my last question for you, Karandeep, what is your preference, consulting or the corporate world?
For me, it's 100% consulting. I wouldn't turn back. But then it was a case of once I got to the second or third year of my career, I'd made that decision that it's time to get into consulting. But corporate has its benefits. You get things like pensions, you have things like job securities. If somebody has a family to support, corporate for you will be a lot more safer decision than it will be to get into consulting.
What was the catalyst for you to hey, consulting's for me? I really want to explore this area.
For me, it was unlimited growth. Working in a corporate role, I was limited by, X amount of years experience, or whether the company had the resources, or whether that was HR or my manager. With consulting, it's kind of, my growth is unlimited. It's all up to me how much I take on. So, if I want to grow a little bit less, that's my decision. If I want to grow more, it's basically in my hands. I'm basically driving the car rather than being in the passenger seat.
Your clients appreciate your work as well. So that's great. Karandeep, thank you so much for being here. And, I just realized that I feel underdressed. I should have worn a suit today. You're looking sharp as always. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.